Hey guys, this is Into the End, doing a deck tech on well, initially it was called the Dark Armory deck. I made a post on it on Reddit. I've since then changed it enough that it no longer resembles an Armory deck, so I've just renamed it Smuggler Control. And I'm going to go through my card choices really quickly and explain some of my thoughts behind why they were used, and also I want to spend a little bit of time also talking about sort of just on a conceptual level deck design theories, and I hope you guys find that entertaining and maybe informative as well. So on the one slot, we'll come back to the chain later. Inspire, I find it to be a pretty useful cards in slower control decks like this one. In Magic, we call this a cantrip. Essentially, you pay a little bit of power. It has a very minor effect, and they draw cards, so they effectively replace themselves. And in game theory, this has some implications. Essentially, what it is it replaces itself, and what it does is it effectively turns your 75 card deck into a 71 card deck, because for the cost of 1 power, you're drawing another one of these random cards. What does that mean? So it means if you have an important card that you really want to draw, for example, I want to draw a Steward of the Past against Dawnwalker and Reanimated decks. My chances of drawing one is not 3 out of 75. My chances of drawing it is 3 out of 71, which gives you a slightly higher chance to draw the cards you want to draw. But what it also means is that it makes your power source count greater. What that means is that as a proportion to the size of your deck. So right now it's 25 power sources, which is 1/3 of the deck. But 25 out of 75 is 1/3. But if you think that it's 25 power sources out of 71, all of a sudden the number of power sources you have in relation to the number of cards in your deck has increased. So if you are a really fast, aggressive deck that only wants to run minimum amount of power, and you need a high density of threats and redundancy, the Inspire may not be a good choice, for example, because it opens you up to a higher chance of getting mana flooded out, or sort of power source flooded out. And the benefit of 1/1 may not justify the spending of 1 power, especially early in the game, in the first 4 turns or so, when you absolutely need to come out onto the board and achieve what your deck is trying to do, which is to win the game early. Okay? Which makes me wonder if this card is good in Recano Plate, and I think many people do use it. I'm not sure about that. So Sabotage, I only run 2 copies because so if you were running a deck with a game plan, an early to mid game plan, and you need Sabotage, you would use it primarily to prevent your opponent from stopping your game plan. So you're disrupting him from disrupting your game plan by using Sabotage aggressively and early. But in a more controlling shell like this one, I'm not interested in casting Sabotage very early. I would get more value out of casting it mid-game when they have about 5 power, because then the real powerful spells that your opponents can cast is usually starting around maybe 6 mana. Like, for example, Obliterate against a burn deck. Getting the Torch out of their hand on turn 1 is okay, but getting the Obliterate out of their hand on turn 5 is much, much better. I will still use it early game if I have absolutely nothing else going on, but if I can help it, I would like to cast it late. So that's why I don't need 4 copies. I'm perfectly fine drawing this late game. That means there's a risk that it will be a dead card when my opponent have no cards in their hand. But if my opponent has no cards in their hand, then I'm okay drawing a dead card as well. It's not quite as bad. Against opposing control decks, then it becomes very useful if you can stop a Channel Tempest, for example, before they hit 8. If you're playing Reanimator, use it when they have a void full of good creatures, as an example. Seek Power has the same effect as Inspire, in the sense that it basically just makes the number of power sources you have in relative to the total deck count higher. But in this deck, I absolutely need it. My power base is pretty poor, and you will see that from my recordings. I run into a lot of trouble and almost lose some games because of faction requirements. So removal suite is 2 Suffocate, 2 Annihilate, 2 Vanquish, 2 Varus Favor. I like to diversify because it's good in my opinion to have a wide variety of answers, even though that does sometimes mean you draw the wrong one for the wrong situation. But I think that's a risk worth taking, to have more answers in your deck. That in terms of the diversity of answers, not more answers. Torch, 4 Torch is I think self-explanatory. Torch is one of the probably the most efficient 1 mana card in the game. It might be the best 1 mana card or 1 power card in the game. Quarry, I want to talk about this a little bit, and I've mentioned it in the games that I play. I think it's a mistake to cast Quarry on turn 2, or as soon as you have the power for it, or as soon as you draw it. I think the longer you wait in casting Quarry, the better it'll be for you, because the more information you will have in the game state, the more cards you will have in play in your hand, you'll be able to make a better decision. A mistake I see a lot of players make is casting it on turn 2. Well, how do you know what you need on turn 2? Now, if you have a deck that's very aggressive and you have a very straightforward, linear game plan, maybe that's okay. Just look for a thread. But if you're playing on a more mid-range or a more controlling shell like mine, I think the longer you hold on to it, the more powerful this card will become. So, and also early on too, when you have 2 sigils in play and you have none in your hand, you play it, and you see a land and a really good card, what would you choose? But if you had not cast it and waited a little bit, you would have a little bit more information. So that's just my opinion. Bailiffs have been very, very good for me. I've beaten some token decks. I think one of them was on camera. And even when it's not against aggressive token decks, this is a very good threat to play against control decks. They have to answer it, otherwise the Warcry triggers add up. It's great for removing opposing Aegis units, or just the Aegis. Overall, this has been a really solid card, and I really like it. Down to 1 copy of Runehammer, I find that I'm not super... Just the way this deck plays out, I'm not super happy drawing multiple copies. In fact, even with 1 copy, often I just fetch for it with Rise to the Challenge when I need it. 4-1, sorry, 4 power, 4 attack, I find to be insufficient in many cases. I think there are too many really strong 5 toughness or 5 health units that I want to kill, and this is always a little bit short. But the good thing is, if you have 1 copy and you always search for it, then it becomes 6 power, and that is actually pretty good. It removes the majority of the creatures that I want to remove. 1 Furnace Mage, just as a silver bullet for tutoring. So that's self-explanatory. 2 Rise to the Challenge. It's a flexible tutor. Allows you to search for the right answers for the right time. And the Flail is often a very good thing to tutor for as well, because you can play this on any power requirement. It allows you to kill Aegis creatures like Silverwing Familiar, and of course it has an amazing interaction with Smuggler's Stash as it gets bigger and bigger every time you play it. So 1 copy I think is very good and warrants that 1 slot. 3 Steward of the Pass, and 2 ways to fetch it. This is one of the main reasons why I initially deviated away from Armory. The reason why I didn't like traditional Armory is 1, very heavy reliance on the Recano Artisan. If you don't draw that card, your weapons are not good enough. And you will see from one of my recorded videos where I played against a traditional Armory deck, and he didn't draw any Recano Artisans, and I was heavily favored in that game because his equipment was just not very good. And the second reason why I didn't like traditional Armory is because it is quite weak against Dawnwalkers, from my experiences anyway, and very, very weak against Reanimator. So I think I want to shore up that weakness by having this creature in it. This creature is just absolutely amazing. It stops all Entomb effects. which I think is very relevant. It blocks pretty much anything. So against bigger time-based decks, you can block their 15/15s or whatever they are. Very, very, very good. And it does a very good job coming out in 4 power to clock up the board and make sure that you survive to the late game. 4 harsh rules are fine. I think in some of the matchups against bigger creature decks, one of your best game plan is to stick a very large weapon, and then just harsh rule away their blockers, and then finishing them off with something like this. It's also a good way to get some card advantage. My deck does not have that many creatures to fight the bigger creature decks, so this is absolutely necessary. Smuggler Stash, I think this is the way you grind out the late game against control decks. Recurring Ikaria and Sword of the Sky King plus any combination of these creatures is very, very, very difficult for control decks to deal with. Killing Aegis creatures multiple times is very hard. Killing something this big as a relic weapon is very difficult for a lot of control decks. Throne Warrens are amazing. I think anybody who plays traditional Armory knows why they're here and what they're good for. And then finally, the 2 big game finishers. Many games are won off of Ikaria, so 1 copy to be fetched out and then recurred 3 times is very, very powerful. And the 1 copy of Sword of the Sky King. This card has been less and less relevant the more I play. I find that in a lot of games where this becomes important, I already have a decent number of creatures to fight with, and this was a little bit of a win more card. When I designed the deck, the idea was you stick a couple of creatures and then you attack with the creatures and use this as a removal spell to clear the path for them. But in actuality, what I find is that in a lot of games where if I have creatures in play, then that meant I've survived the first half of the game and have successfully removed all of his creatures, and that's why I have creatures in play, in which case then I would have won with the creatures alone. So I don't know what to do about that, but I still think 1 copy in the deck is okay. Power base is not good at all. I have triple red, triple green, double black here, double red here, and then double green on turn 3 and 4. The requirements of this deck is crazy high. Very often I'll get mana screwed. The 4 copies of Seek Power helps. I wonder if the solution is to run more of the dual lands, dual color lands. I only have because I don't have a lot of units, I'm only running the seats because they're most likely to come into play, not depleted. But maybe the answer is to remove some copy of these sigils and play more dual lands. But maybe someone else can help me figure that out and let me know. So here's the deck. I've been doing quite well with the deck, and I hope you enjoy the games that I've recorded. If you have any questions, I'm going to be posting this on Reddit, so if you have any questions, just go ahead and post it to Reddit or simply reply to the video, the YouTube video. Okay, thanks.